All right, today on the Second Chance podcast, we're talking with Jen Johnson, an ER nurse with 16 years experience, a wife, mother, and now debut author, whose book, Nursing Intuition, How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Career, has already sold over 6,000 copies ahead of its release. Jen's story is one of resilience, overcoming a career setback, navigating bullying, and surviving burnout during the COVID era. She's here to share how she turned around those challenges into growth and what it means to truly thrive in the face of adversity. I'm excited, Jen. A little unknown fact about me was I worked in the emergency room back in my really late teens, early 20s. So yes,
Oh, your family. That's it.
yeah, no,
Your
yes,
family
family.
for life.
I was excited because when I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, because sometimes the barrier of knowledge with your guest is very educational, but these become very conversational because I understand, kind of got a picture of what you dealt with. Thanks for
Oh,
coming on. I really glad that you're here.
no worries. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah, you were. When I was reading and just getting up to speed here, but you shared how with in your notes how you were fired early in your career after a medical error, but fought to return and eventually left as one of the most educated nurses in the room. Tell us about the turning point in that journey and what lessons from that experience shaped you to kind of where you are now.
Yeah. So anybody in nursing, if they say that they've never made a med error, they're either lying or completely oblivious. We've all done
Yeah.
it. It happens. We're humans. So I was actually brand new in my career and had been talking with the doctor, took a verbal order. So instead of them writing it down and me taking that piece of paper to get my meds and come back, it was just a verbal order. It was a quickie little medicine. I thought, oh, it's not a big deal. And so instead of giving morphine syrup 40 milligrams, it was 40 mils is what I gave. And the doctor had concurred with me that it was 40 mils, ended up being about 8 times what the dose was ordered. So, thankfully patient was young and healthy. There were no adverse outcomes. They were just a little high and a little sleepy for a few hours. But because I was new, I was still on probation. And I walk into the room, I've already completely broken down myself. The guilt is unbelievable when you make that first error. And, in a very, very small hospital where mountains are made out of molehills for sure. And, my boss calls me in and, hey, what happened? Took complete responsibility for it. This was my error. I did talk to my doc. My doc and I, even after the error, had talked about, yes, she had said the wrong thing and she was sorry. Then she sunk me afterwards, you know, and you want to talk about a hard life lesson. You walk into a profession where you're supposed to be trusting each other and helping each other. And the first opportunity that there was for me to kind of be the scapegoat, that was it. So
Yeah.
I got fired, and it was just this surreal feeling of like, what are you talking about fired? Like, what? Like, the patient was okay. Yes, they had to stay a couple of hours. They actually, everything was explained to them. Thankfully it was a fairly young person, so they were pretty cool about it. Um, and held no ill will that way. And it didn't seem to be a big deal at the moment, but a few days had gone by. I got called back into the office, and then this all happened. And I'm going, I am like not even a year into my career,
Yeah.
and this is what I've come up against. And so it was ridiculously humbling to go, holy crap, this can happen. And it's happened to me. And you're kind of sitting there going like, well, now what? You know? So I got on the phone with my union, and we talked things over. And theoretically, they didn't have to give me a reason for being fired, but they did. And so my union took it and ran with it and fought. And after a couple of big meetings and back and forth and this, that, and the other, we had kind of agreed upon, that I would come back. I had suggested that I was already going to look into an RN refresher program, which was just another extension of continuing education up here, where you could, take some more courses, do some more clinical experience, really kind of get your foot in. This was usually used for people who'd been out for extended periods of time, like away from bedside, 5 years away from bedside, you're looking to get back in. And so I suggested that I was going to take that. And they're like, hey, we think that's a good idea. Yeah, now that's a part of your contract that you have to do that. So I'm like, okay. Well, so went back home, tail between my legs, back to Southwest Ontario, and went to my, home hospital in my community that I grew up in, and work in it, and not sure of how much to share, because you say that you've been fired, it taints people's
Yeah.
opinion of you real quick. So I said, oh, I'm doing this for some extracurriculars, and I just want to learn, and I'm just not sure, and kind of played it off that way. Because really, working the floor, I had that was okay, that worked. I had the flow, and yes, I was still learning, but I was halfway decent. And so months of that, and going back and forth with the hospital. And so when I came back, and everything was said and done, they said, well, now you've got to do 525 hours of work, back at baseline probation again. So again, you could be fired at any moment in 525 hours, which is probably about, well, for a part-timer, is 6 to 8 months, depending.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just going, okay, like, you better believe, like, the anxiety was insanity. Like, every day wondering, is something going to happen? Is what's
Yeah.
going to be the reason today? And then to toss, my supervisor was a bully on top of it, which was just horrific. So, enduring 5 years of that
So
before.
real quick, I wanted to ask you, just so
Yeah,
folks understand rules. In the States, where I'm from, versus Canada, just so we can close any gaps. Typically, if you're on probation, you can be fired. No, just
any reason.
that's why
Yeah.
they do it, for just make sure it's a fit, make sure it's all the things. It keeps you from having to pay any kind of work, long-term unemployment benefits.
Mhm.
It's just a kind of coming in as a mutual agreement. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, so you could be fired for any reason. There was a personality conflict.
Yeah.
They just didn't feel like it was
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
Bye. See ya. No explanation given. So it was
Yeah,
just,
so that's the same. That's the same here. All right. So that's the first thing I want to just clarify for everyone, for those listening around the world. Um, the second thing is on the rules, just so everyone's clear. Most of those doctor's orders are put in writing. You said you took a verbal order, so just really make everyone, or let everyone, not make, but let's make sure everyone understands what you're taught with that,
yeah,
because that's a big deal.
it is a big deal. So they
It's a
really
big
tend.
deal that it's a big deal that both of you broke protocol, and both one of you got punished. That's where the big deal comes from.
And yeah, so verbal orders, typically, unless it's emergency situations, you really shouldn't be taking verbal orders.
Yeah.
And that's for that reason. Medication errors can happen very, very easily. Somebody misunderstands somebody else. Um, you're you're typically not supposed to be taking verbal orders. Does this happen a lot? Yes. And I was in the emergency section of the ER at the time. So did that, it was a busy day, and sure enough, she just kind of said it, and I just kind of took it like an idiot. so
Yeah.
so there was errors on both parts, for sure. Like, I should have pushed for her to write it down, and it would have taken all of 3 seconds.
Yeah, one of the things that two was, well, I was fortunate around some of my mentors to where you were taught to respect docs and things along those lines. But if they gave you an order that conflicted with your training, was to make sure that you questioned it, and do
Yeah,
not take it at face value.
yeah,
Um, and that comes from just leadership, right? And different leaders, different thought processes, and all these things. Some are taught in that the doctor's the final say, and you never question, and all these things. And now we've gotten to where it's more detached, leadership styles, to where it's more moral authority and doing the right thing, and all those things, and not being afraid of questioning each other, because we understand all sides have bad days, and all
yes,
sides have moments where we can help and lead each other, and you don't need to be told. So yeah, that's all right.
yeah.
So what happened to the? Um, Tell me, how did the doc just said you made that order on your own, or
No, yeah. Oh no, I told her 40 milligrams, not 40
yeah,
mils. And, the kicker was, even after this had happened and I was so upset and she was upset, and we had talked afterwards about like, and she apologized. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I gave that order, da da da. And I'm like, so I left the shift thinking that, okay, we both made an error. We're going to learn from it. We're going to move forward. And then all this happened. I'm like,
it's got to be
okay.
documented, right? You got y'all
Yeah.
document it. It's going to go to peer review. Somebody's got,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's somebody's butt is, it's going to ultimately end up there.
Yeah. And, it was just one of those super eye opening moments about the hard life lessons, which
Yeah,
I only learn the lessons when they're super, super hard and
right.
shoved down my throat and really make sure they stick. So to then, come back after the orientation period again and restarting everything and watching my P's and Q's and just, filled with anxiety on the daily basis, it was horrific. And it was took months for getting through the mitigation process, getting rehired, going back and doing the education, getting through all of that. Like, I think it took easily like 6 to 8 months
Yeah.
to get back to there, and then starting from square one. So you better believe, like, I had a whiteboard at home that I counted down every single minute. And a 12-hour shift is really only 12 or 11.25 hours up here, because we don't get paid for one break and this, that, and the other. So you couldn't count it as 12 hours, 12 full hours. You had to count it as 11.25. So I'm like, I need to make extra sure that I
Okay.
am watching my P's and Q's. We're counting down. We're accurate about this, because I'm gonna get screwed again. Was the only thing that ever popped through my head.
Yeah. What kind of support network did you have around yourself at this step? There you go. See, it's
Zero. Absolute. So from a nursing profession wise, I had nothing.
yeah,
There was one. Um, so she was also kind of a supervisor. Like, she was more the educational supervisor than like the daily on the floor supervisor. And she felt like the only one who believed me as to what happened. And she was there to say, we're going to get you through this. Here's all the education you need. We're going to just do it step by step by step. We're going to have weekly meetings. Whatever you need, I'm right here. One person. And when I was going through everything, it's a small town of less than 5,000 people. Um, I had thought I had made friends. I had my
yeah,
now husband. I was living with him, but we were still dating. His mother lived next door. They had a lot of extended family within the town. But I was a newcomer in that town. And if you've never lived rural, holy Hannah, it's nonstop gossip central.
yeah,
And so, then the rumors started to swirl. Why I got fired, and why did I get fired, and why wasn't I working, and da, 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 da. And so I'm just like, this is nuts. And all of a sudden, everybody who I thought I could have leaned on, nobody came to the house.
yeah,
Nobody texted me. Nobody reached out. There was the pharmacy tech who understood what had happened, and she was the only one to come to the house and talk to me. Everybody else, gone. It was like I was a pariah and nobody wanted anything to do with me.
yeah. Mine was didn't getting a receipt for a report, and I went through utter hell over that. It just came up later on some investigative stuff, and I've had to. It's took me years to just kind of process some of the stuff there, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the raw and dirty was I couldn't prove my intentions were because I didn't get a receipt signed.
Come
Um,
on.
Isn't that crazy? And that's when you said that. That's the first thing that popped in my head. I hadn't thought about that in years. Um, I hadn't thought about that. I said not that much. Like I thought about the event a lot.
Yeah.
We talk about it a lot. But I haven't thought about that moment that got me kind of in the uncertain zone of just it was over a receipt. So, and your network, and to speak to the folks that are listening, let me ask you this, and we'll tee you up. It's kind of just see where you'll take it. And I
Mm-hmm.
got some pointers as well. But if you could do that part of it over, not having that network, what would you do?
You know, I would do the exact same,
Yeah,
because I learned. and I learned
Would you
hard and I
lean
learned
in, but
fast.
would you try to keep processing it all on your own, or would you try to find that network? I learned as I got older, if I would have just found people that was detached from the situation, it would have helped me find clarity. I
Yeah.
was too wrapped up emotionally in the situation with friends who cared more about me, and then people who didn't, who was like you, was on the other side executing the punishment, right? And I had friends that cared, but the moment I find people from the outside that are detached, they're like, "No, you're gonna be all right, dude. Stop.
Yeah.
You stop, chill out.
Yeah.
This is,
Stop
yeah, you're
spinning.
not, yeah,
Stop
stop
spinning. It's
spinning.
fine.
You're fine." It took that outside people to come in through the chaos to say, listen. So my advice, I think, would be if I was back in those times and all the hell is starting to come in around you, is I would just try to find some outside,
Yeah.
just someone who doesn't do what you do, who doesn't understand the culture, who doesn't understand everything. As soon as I did that, they were like, "You're not gonna die, bud.
Yeah.
You're good. Don't stop.
Yeah.
This is just." And then if you'll move these pieces around, this is how everything's gonna get better. And I was like, "Where the hell you been?"
I I wished I would have had something like that. I think that
Yeah,
would have been so phenomenal, but I was just so mortified. I
yeah,
was absolutely embarrassed. I'm like, the whole town knows that I've been fired. Now I'm returning to this job where
same.
I've been fired. You
Yeah,
know, because everybody talks and that's, if there's something interesting in town, that's what's being talked about. And I felt like even after I returned and even years later, like there was every now and again something would pop up and I'd hear about it. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me right now. Like it's been years. And but really it just solidified the fact that I was not meant to be there. And that was
I
the
got a.
first.
I worked in my hometown that I grew up in. I got a DUI as a cop, and man, you talk about head in the sand.
Oh,
Yeah, like I was absolutely could not, thought everybody cared, Jen.
yeah.
Thought that I had let that entire county down, everybody around me, all my friends, all my people, all the things, because it was my identity and it was everything.
Yeah.
And so every time I had, like, I would just, it was hard for me just to go to the county just because of how I felt.
Yeah.
And then one of my friends one day was like, "Dude, nobody cares." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You'd be surprised. Nobody knows who you are anymore. They got their own
Yeah.
crap they're dealing with." And he really started encouraging me to just deal, like,
Yeah.
stop. Not it's no. Everybody else moved on, but you, dude, stop being in this hole. But that outside voice to help the spit stop the spin, Jen.
Yeah. Because I think I've been back. So after we left, I think I've been back maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years. And, my kids, my mother-in-law and my kids' grandma is still up there. They go up there, they spend a month up there in the north
Yeah,
and they do all the rural things and they do all this kind of stuff. And, when they first started coming up alone, my husband would go up, spend a week with them and then peace out so that, they could get some alone time with grandma kind of thing and we could get a break. And my mother-in-law would ask, she'd be like, "Oh, are you coming up?" And I'm like, "Oh no, oh, I'm working."
yeah,
I had just switched jobs, so I'm like, "Oh, I'm low on the totem pole now, like I can't, I don't have any seniority when it comes to vacation time and I can't come at peak time. Oh no, I'm sorry." And even writing the book and putting these experiences in the book
yeah.
and thinking about it, I'm like, man, do I think I'm healed some moments? Absolutely. Do I think, oh, I've let it go, I've grown as a person? And then a memory comes up and I'm like, I'm gonna send that person a signed copy of my book.
Yeah.
And I'm debating giving it to them to be like, hey.
That's a lot of power. That's a superpower. That's a great, yeah, like it is because it's closure, right? It's
Yeah.
um I would go to like a conference with my wife, and I ran into old colleagues, and they would, and so I did that the first time. I didn't go, and then I went to try to tip my toe, and when I went, he was like, said something derogatory, not bad, but just like, "Hey, you're always a little wild," or and it pissed me off because he didn't know. I didn't feel like he knew me. right?
Yeah.
He was trying to qualify. He was trying to take me back to the place that I felt like I had overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did that, it hit that trigger. And when I learned about triggers, because things I didn't know,
Yep.
I didn't go for a couple of years until I got ready. And I put what I learned boundaries of
Yes.
how I could install them and all those little things like that, right? But it's so now, and I'll run into people from the past now, and I will literally sometimes preface it with like, "Hey, I really appreciate you being around when I was growing up, and thank you for having patience with me. I know I probably ruffled your feathers and pissed you with all the things, right? But I realize one of my older mentors said he goes, you were fine. It just took you longer to grow up than it did a lot of people. So."
Which
Uh,
sometimes we need that. Everybody's different.
What did so I got a couple things, but we mentioned the book,
Yep.
and we were talking about trying to create a positive influence for people that are struggling where you are. Because listen,
Yep.
I'll tell you this: if we can do it right on Google, there's not a the nursing world just and all that the folks that are in there. There's not enough gens that are mentoring these hard times.
Yeah.
So did you pack a lot of this stuff in your book? Tell us about your book.
Yeah, so Nursing Intuition was born out of a trauma journal. So when COVID hit, and they're like, "Oh, it's going to be a week, it's going to be 2 weeks," and you're like, "Okay, not a big deal." And then
Yeah.
3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and you're going, this is not cool." And so we ended up having so many people come forward and volunteer their services and send gifts and food. Oh my God, the food was never ending. And we had attorneys come forward to say, like, you know what, we're going to do everybody's wills for free. Everybody who's frontline, we're going to do their wills for free. And we're like, that's so nice.
Yeah.
You're like, so all I understand is that I'm not expected to make it.
Yeah.
Like, it was a
That's
lovely
I didn't
gesture.
know. I didn't think about that. You
Oh,
touch on
yeah.
I didn't think about the goodwill from goodwill right? Of how people were trying to help. I didn't that you know what I mean? Like
it was
holy
it was a lot. Like,
yes. You start dealing with not only I mean you watch people die, but you also start dealing with your own mortality.
oh, because you
But I
can.
didn't think about them like an attorney being like, you know what, we're gonna do your wills like that. Hey man, you could have bought us pizza. You could have bought us pizza.
And I know that they were coming at it from a very proactive and appropriate, like, we want to make sure that, God forbid, anything happened, everything's set, and your kids are covered, and this is covered, and everything's set in stone, and you're covered, right? Because a lot of
Yeah,
young nurses, we haven't done our wills. Like, thankfully I have. Once we had kids, you had to, kind of thing. And so we've already had ours covered, but at the same time I'm like, it's really hammering home the message that we're not expected to survive this. And it's that all of a sudden you're going, I could die. Like, really? Like, so coming to that realization and going, oh man, and by the time that had happened, New York got started to get just absolutely slaughtered. And we're only, I'm an hour from Niagara Falls. So
right.
New York is right there. And I'm going, it's right there. It's right there, and you're going, holy crap. So I'm not sleeping at this point because we have no daycare. So my husband was frontline. So he is infection control. He used to be a medic, but was doing infection control. So he's Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. I switched to straight nights. So I'm staying up all day with the kids who were 4 and 5 at the beginning of this, and staying up all night and staying up all day and staying up all night and staying up all day and staying up all night. So I was a basket case by about 6 weeks, and was just like, I can't, I'm over it. And so I'm like, how do you potentially let your kids cope with the fact that you may not make it when mom chose to continue to go to work? We all had the option to not go. Every single one of us had the option not to go, but we chose to we're just going to show up. We're going to do our allotted shifts. We're not going to pick up overtime. We're not going to call in sick unless we actually have COVID, kind of thing. Because we all were saving our sick days in case we got intubated. And so we're just like, we're just going to show up, and that's it. And so I'm like, well, how do you explain that to the kids that mom wanted or continued to go to work? and that potentially would have caused the end of me. And so I started to write down the really good stories from nursing about, the saves that I'd had and the patients that had made an impact and all this kind of stuff. There was like 4 or 5 stories. Very quickly, the trauma starts just unraveling itself. And, the patient deaths and the bullying and the
Yeah.
inexperience and all of that comes just rushing right back. And I'm looking at everything going like, there's got to be something to this. It's not just for my kids anymore. This is bigger than this at this point. Was listening to a publishing house out of the US, Llewellyn,
Yeah.
who's a metaphysical publisher, and they do a lot of fantastic work. And they were having this online book fair. So the one author was talking about her book, Intuition at Work. And it was just like a light bulb went off. I'm like, intuition at work? I'm like, I use my intuition all the time at home or at work. And I'm going, oh my God, that's it. So I went back to the stories, and sure enough, every single story had some element of, I had a gut feeling, I trusted it, I didn't,
Yeah.
I said something, I didn't, I was believed, I wasn't. And going from that, I'm like, okay, well, here's everything put together now. But August 2020, I can't put anything out with the misinformation, disinformation that was flying around. I'm like, I would be risking my license if I put this out without a lot of science to back it up.
Yeah.
And ended up doing a deep dive and the psychology and insight versus intuition and all these things. And not only is there so much information and studies and peer-reviewed evidence-based studies on intuition, but specifically intuition in nursing. And I'm
Yeah.
going, okay, so we were taught if it's science-based, we should be teaching it. And so I'm like, it's science-based. There you go. We should be teaching it because we already use it, especially cops, anybody
Yeah.
who's working with the public at their
They
worst
tell you not
moments.
to use. They softly make you self aware of not to trust your gut.
Yep.
That's what, because you got to develop that.
Yes.
And sometimes that's what caused a lot of cops were going with their guts, and um, it would create bad moments and tactics to
Yep.
where they were not on gun, or they were not, and bullets flying made a difference in trusting your gut.
Absolutely.
Like walking up to cars, of trying to treating. Yeah, that's why cops sometimes get aggressive on side of the road. They don't know who they're stopping. They know
No,
you've sped. They know
that's it.
whatever. So, but they approach every. Don't get complacent just because it's Sally who's got her, who looks like she's on her way home. Sally's actually been kidnapped, and there's a gunman in the back seat. That's the kind of crap that goes through your training scenarios, right?
Which it
So here,
needs to, because
yes.
it's those moments where you get caught with your pants down because you made an assumption,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just, it's insight, it's experience, it's intuition, like it's everything merged together. And it's not like I'm saying, throw
I get
science out
it.
the window.
Listen,
You're
I
like,
know what you're talking.
I know you
I
know
can
what
feel
I'm
the
talking
when
about,
someone's done that crime. I can feel the energy in the room. Like
right?
you knew it. Like you felt. I understand exactly what you're talking about. Or when that moment or whatever. Like I would, sometimes like now it'll be weird to be cold. Like I'll be like, why did it get cold? Why did it get cold? Right? And but just sometimes in those feelings and it took me a while to really trust my own faith
Mm-hmm.
and focus on things that were coming to me and opportunities for me. That's
You know it.
so go back to your when you was talking about license at risk. Were you going
Yeah.
to conflict COVID? Was you going to go against kind of what they were putting out on the COVID side, or are you just worried about on the intuition side?
Just on the intuition side, right? Because
Yeah,
it seems like a very woo-woo concept.
yeah, oh yeah,
We do talk about it, but it's at 3 a.m. and it's kind of hushed tones, and
yeah.
it's
I
not
just had a
until you get a
feeling.
couple
I
years
can hear
on.
that conversation. Like, you know what?
I know what I
I
thought.
had a feeling this was going to happen. That's why I had it in my head. That's right. And I
Right?
just looked them in the eyes, and I looked them in the eyes, and I just knew that's why I was putting the leads on.
Yeah.
I've had those
I know.
conversations. I know.
When a patient tells you flat out, I'm going to die, you believe them. You don't believe them the first time. You're like, it's fine, everything's fine,
Yeah,
whatever. And then they die, and you go, oh man. And then you have to deal with that. You're like, did I not do anything because I didn't believe them? And then the guilt sets in.
yeah,
But when that happens again, you're like, uh-oh. You're like, oh, no, 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 no. I've been through this situation. I'm going to work extra hard just to make sure I've covered all my bases. If they die, I've done everything. It's out of my
yeah,
control. And it takes a long time to get to a point where death isn't the enemy. Death happens, and it's going to happen to all of us, and that's just what it is. But getting to a place where you're no longer blaming yourself for every single patient death, that takes time. That
I
takes a lot of
remember
time.
in EMS, you're always going to be pumping on the chest, trying to shock IVs.
Yep.
But I remember that same feeling the first time that I knew like there was time, like that it was this person's time. And when we got there, it wasn't. They had finally gave us the ability not to. We could
Call it.
pronounce in the field, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time when when you're kind of those when you're in one of those situations where you're going to, but that hand holding for that time to pass on and the peace that was there is realizing that was just much part of what I was doing as um, helping someone find peace was just as much as trying to bring them back to life.
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
Absolutely.
You
Watching, yeah.
do you get to do any coaching with your book or what do you kind of where you see yourself 5 years,
In 5 years.
what's your plan with that with where your story, it's really good.
Thank you. In 5 years, I will
I'm
still be
just
at the
joking. You
bedside.
can be
That's
whatever.
okay.
Okay.
But like,
I just think that's the typical interview. Why do you see yourself?
what do
No,
you
like
see
what is
yourself?
your what would you like to see your you like me, you've had a lot, you get a lot go on, and
Oh
you
yeah.
learned early to pay attention to it, right? So
Yep.
what are you thinking you'd like to see happen with?
I would die actually to see this brought into nursing education. I would
Huh?
even just as like a suggested reading,
Yeah,
I would lose it. The fact that this magnet hospital ended up buying 6,000 books for their nurses for nursing week coming, I'm beyond ecstatic about.
need more of
I
that, right? That
Yeah,
would help.
and
More of
they
that
had
would
kind of
help.
said, yeah, they kind of said, we'd love to have you down and come and speak and all this. I'm like, I could speak. I've done a
Yeah,
little bit of speaking with one of the universities up here to their first year nurses, and
that's good.
I ended up talking to the professor who ended up bringing me on, and she's like, "Oh, would you be interested in teaching a 3-hour lecture?" I'm like, "Pardon?" She's like, "Oh, just tell your stories." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. Do we want them to stay in nursing or do we not want them to stay in nursing?"
Yeah.
She goes, "Oh no, we want them to stay." I'm like, "Oh, I've got less of that material."
You could teach it. Listen, you could. I work on some of the same stuff. You could teach it in a. This is repercussions of action. So
Yeah,
the thing that you're going to. Mine was that signature on that envelope. You got my brain working now.
right?
Is documentation.
Yes.
And if you're going to set in these classes and all these old guys or women and whoever's going to come in here and they're going to tell you every time and you're going to hear this thing to where you're like, can't
We're
be that big of a deal. You know what I
honestly,
mean? And you're just going to be like, and you're going to say, ah, yeah, I got a system, this, that, and the other. And I'll go,
fine.
like, I'm getting ready to take you on a journey of what will happen. And here's what you could add in there. Here I am telling you what to do. This is my mom. This is my mom talking. Um, if you could take that and you have the story and the lessons learned, but here's where you come in is this is where I step in. This is how it affected me professionally, but this is how it was eroding at my personal life.
Yeah.
This was the drinking. This was the aftermath. This was the undue stress. This was how I had everything together until it started. Someone just started twisting those screws. You get
Mm-hmm.
investigated. You have this. You have a little bit of question. I'm like, no, I would never do. And then next thing you know, you take all that home.
Yeah.
And then what it did with me was it really started unscraping just why I kind of functioned the way I did,
Yeah.
which is what I really like talking about. Just dealing, you got to deal with your crap. You got to figure out who you are.
100%.
Uh,
Listen, everybody has trauma. My
yeah,
trauma will not be the same as anybody else's. Somebody may look at
absolutely.
my trauma and be like, that's nothing compared to
That's
what
not.
I've gone through. Absolutely. Doesn't make
Yep.
your trauma any less valid, doesn't make my trauma any less valid. It just, we're all, because a lot of us, that's just the way we learn.
Yeah.
And it was a hard lesson. And, I tend to like to look at the silver linings looking back, and it's, had that not happened, had that not been so stressful, I wouldn't have vowed to be the most educated nurse to lead that place. I don't know if I
Yeah.
ever was, but like I got a ton of certificates because I had a ton of time to sit around and do nothing. Because we
Yeah.
saw sometimes no patients in the ER. The hospital was just that small. So, you're like, well, I'm going to get this certificate. I'm going to get that certificate. I'm going to be so much more educated because I'm not going to let this happen to me again, and go with it. And so, it's would I have stayed? Potentially. Would I have had kids in that community? Potentially. Would I have gotten to the point of ending it? More than likely. So, that behavior and that mistake, however traumatizing and severely awful it was for those months going through it, and then the aftermath, and hearing the whispers here, there, and everywhere afterwards, it wouldn't have pushed me. I wouldn't have been nearly as motivated to leave had that not happened.
Yeah.
So,
Did,
silver
did you,
lining, it was awful, but I learned.
yeah. And you, like it's a great story for this podcast, right? It's absolutely the second chance, but kind of what I hear is you had to give yourself the second chance.
Oh
Nursing
yeah.
was like, I said, but you were just where it got, because I believe in holding myself to a higher standard, and I had to really get comfortable. I'll tell you one of my defining moments. You'll hear me if I get to speak around you. You'll hear me talk about this. Is forgiving yourself.
Oh yeah.
Right. That was like I forgive everybody in the world, but then I was still holding on to all these things. I just can't believe I let this happen to myself. And
Mm-hmm.
when I finally was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
forgiving myself. I'm moving on. Y'all,
Yeah.
you can go fight with somebody else.
I found a lot of comfort in the anger at others, like a
Yeah.
lot of comfort.
Somebody,
And
yeah,
I didn't drink. Like in university, sure, the occasional binge, but like not every day. After getting fired and starting back and having to worry constantly, oh man, you better believe all of a sudden I got real comfortable with drinking. And COVID, really, daily almost bottles of wine for a
yeah.
period.
States the same
And
way. They
yep,
closed gyms and opened liquor stores extra hours.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And I
that's what.
mean, and we had already legalized marijuana, so I'm like,
Yeah,
I would love to, but that's just not my cup of tea. It's just me and THC do not gel. CBD, absolutely, bring those gummies over here. Those little menches are just fantastic. um but yeah, a lot of it was like finally getting to a point of being that depressed, that out of it, the burnout, the not being myself, the all of it, the darkness of all of it. um
yeah.
Finally reaching out.
You hit it. Darkness. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Darkness. That's a heck of that's a really great way of describing it. That's why I wear black. No, I'm just kidding.
I honestly,
Um,
the only reason I don't wear black is because most of my background is very dark.
yeah. Um, yeah, but you're spot on with that, man. And we got we got a wrap, but here's I hope people are listening, right? This is a good one. I really hope that people are listening to just kind of two people who's had a significant crossroads.
Yep.
And one of the things I think I didn't pay attention to early on was what where life the new path that life was trying to send me on. And
Yeah.
I followed it. That's why I was kind of asking what your plan was, right? Of like, because it gave you this moment. Now, what are you gonna do with it, right? It's as negative as it was. What are you gonna do with it?
I'm hoping to turn it into 1,000 times more positive,
Yeah,
because we've all been there. We've all been through it. If you've worked during COVID, forget about it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't care if you're in the hospital or not, or at bedside or not. You've been there. It's a very universal experience with nursing. Um, and a lot of it has to change. The nursing eating their young BS, that has to quit. We need to start really supporting each other, because this generation, it's not that there's a shortage of nurses. There's a shortage of nurses willing to put up with it, and so they're
yeah,
just walking away. And kudos.
Is that
If
bad leadership, Jen? Is that we didn't get into your
mm,
like your bully and some of your folks, but
yeah,
is that do you think it's bad leadership for the nurses or bad culture or what
I
is
think it's
that?
bad culture for sure. And
Yeah,
then, coming into a depending on where you're at, right? So you've already been through clinical, you've had a little bit of exposure to what workplaces can be like, good, bad, and otherwise. But if you end up getting a job and you're stuck on a floor that absolutely is sucking the life out of you, you don't realize that there's anything else at that point. You just think, oh my God, all nursing is like this. This is horrific. Forget this. I'm out. And the number of nurses that are not just leaving bedside, but like leaving nursing, period,
yeah.
is staggering. So we really do need to take a really decent look at what's going on in the background and start putting in a lot of preventative effort at the beginning while people are getting into nursing because they're already
Yeah.
thinking about it.
You some I echo this a lot from a friend of mine, and he gave me perspective one time, and like what you said, where people were leaving, and people were griping this, that, and the other, and he's talking about police work, nurses. This is very relevant to both. He says, sometimes when everybody's really hating on this job, they need to go back and remember why they got into it.
Yep.
He said, you didn't get into it to do all. He says I can go back and look at everybody's resume or their application to help people.
Yeah.
He says, and he reminded me of that when he was talking. I was like, it's just good when you lose your way. Just sort of, that's always a good one for cops and nurses and firemen and military and like,
EMS and
because
yeah.
you get caught up in the culture and the negative
Oh
culture
yeah.
and crappy leaders and
And the
and here's what I
patients.
learned. Yeah, hey, and here's what I learned is everybody's trying to figure it out. Sometimes your worst leaders just don't know, but they don't want to ask for help.
Yep.
And so but just remember why you got there.
Yeah.
Um, I gotta let you go. I'll talk
Yeah.
to you
That's fine.
forever.
Same.
Um,
Same.
yeah, it's an easy conversation, which I've never met a stranger either. But how can folks connect with you and then get your book? What direction do you want folks to follow?
Yeah. So if you want to find me, you can find me at Instagram and TikTok at ernurse.jen, Jenn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm probably the most active there, Jennifer Johnson, BSCN You can find me if you search up on Amazon, Jennifer A. Johnson, RN. You can find me and all my books. There's more coming. It's just a matter of pacing myself.
Yeah.
And rxforgrowth.com is my website, and you can reach me from there.
That's awesome. So we want to make sure, folks, you listening, you heard what our goal is, and sometimes when people are connected and it flows really well, it's part of that intuitive journey that we're all on. So don't be afraid to share this with your bosses and your leads inside the medical world, and so we can help Jen get her message out. It's a really cool story. It's a great story that fits amazingly into the Second Chance podcast. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.